From our 22 News Broadcast Center, this is 22 News in Focus.
A good Sunday afternoon and welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Juliana Mazza. We've been hearing a lot about them, and today on 22 News in Focus, we're going to show you how they work. We're talking about drones. There's a chance you've seen someone flying a drone, maybe you even have one yourself. The question is, do you know how to use it safely? And as a citizen, do you know what your rights are? Joining me right now is Jeff Burns, a drone advocate and photographer who uses drone technology. We also have David Bartley on the Holyoke City Council. Holyoke is considering passing new drone regulations, so thank you both for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Happy to be here.
So Jeff, my first question, we'll start with you. Just explain what are drones? What is this new technology that's out?
Drone is an unmanned aerial vehicle that allows you to fly up to 1,500 feet into the sky, but per FAA's regulations, you're supposed to stay within 400 feet of airspace and below. It is, they're usually multi-rotor devices that have cameras attached to them. There's hobbyists that use them. There's all kinds of professionals out there that are using them, and it's just a device that allows me to put a camera in the sky where I otherwise wouldn't be able to see.
And now, David, I know Holyoke is trying to regulate drones. Why the need to regulate them? What's the issues at hand here?
Right, so thanks for having me and happy 4th of July. So the Holyoke City Council, the way the system works is that any councilor can file an order. This order was filed by the council president, who's the real advocate behind it. So I don't know exactly what prompted him to file this, but we have it in front of our ordinance committee. We're reviewing it, and so I think in general, if you look at the language of the ordinance, the purpose is to protect privacy rights of homeowners in Holyoke. And if I just speak for the council president, when he and I discussed this yesterday, that was really what his focus is, to try to make sure that there's homeowners have privacy rights and also that residents are kept safe from unmanned aircraft if there's potential liability involved.
Okay, so Jeff, as someone who operates these things, do you respect privacy? I'm sure. What rules do you abide by?
My personal rule is to abide by privacy and to just respect people's property in general. I make sure that I'm flying safely. I'm not, getting too close to other people's property. If I'm out on behalf of a real estate agent, I'm on either the city's property, being public property, or I'm on their physical property with permission and operating with, my guidelines as well as the FAA's guidelines, making sure that I'm not, hovering over other people's property. I'm not seeing things I shouldn't be seeing. I'm not trespassing. I'm not going over a certain altitude or just going over other people's property in general.
So is this just something that you obey by, or is there a rule or a guideline that requires you to do that?
It's kind of like a guideline. Like you can't be trespassing. If I don't have permission to be over someone else's property, I'm trespassing, and that's kind of just how I operate as it is right now. I'm not completely sure if that's how the FAA values other people's property. Their concern is to not be flying over people and to not be, flying in federal airspace as well as commercial airspace. And those are also places and things that I avoid.
Okay, so you obviously have some clear understanding of how you want to operate, but maybe not everyone has that same understanding. Dave, is that the reason maybe why you feel like there needs to be something in paper to make people have to follow this?
Well, I'm going to answer it this way, that I didn't file the order. So, and an order is something that just starts the debate. So we've, in our Holyoke City Council Ordinance Committee, we've started the debate and we've drafted an ordinance that we're now sending on to the Mass Aeronautic Commission, because it's our opinion and the opinion of our law department that they need to review our regulations. So when it comes back to us, then I'll have a chance to better formulate my opinion. Right now, I'd probably lean to vote yes in support of it. And again, it's mainly for public safety purposes and privacy purposes. There is no ordinance right now. So, Jeff's, and I've known Jeff a while, he's an outstanding business person, a great photographer, and a conscientious individual. Is everybody else that way? Is everybody else a professional? Hard to say exactly. Therefore, an ordinance is probably warranted.
Now, I know you said you didn't file this, but obviously you are a resident. You live in Holyoke. For you, is there any concern with your privacy just as a citizen?
I have not seen a drone other than watching their videos. I've not seen one fly anywhere in Holyoke. So this idea of having a drone ordinance didn't come to me, so therefore it didn't originate. The ordinance didn't originate with me. But others have seen them, and there's a chance for a controversy to happen with privacy issues or a liability question to happen. So we thought at this early stage, let's craft something and let's see what the Mass Aeronautics Commission provides in terms of feedback.
Okay. Now, Jeff, I know that there are regulations obviously being considered. Does this conflict with the FAA, or is it hard as a drone user? You have federal guidelines and then maybe local guidelines. Is that a gray area or confusing in any way?
It can be confusing. I think because we have the Federal Aviation Authority, that's their job, is to create the policy around drones and as well as any aircraft. So my first eye is I'm going to abide by federal regulations. And in my research and in the studies I've read, the FAA has said to municipalities, go easy with the policies that you want to create, because what you create might interfere with what ours is out there. And with the new rules and regulations that were just put out last week, that's where I think we're going to see a lot of other municipalities trying to come out and trying to create similar policies around protecting the citizens. I understand to protect the citizens, but at the same time, it might interfere with what we professionally have the capability of doing.
Now, you mentioned the FAA's new rules. What exactly was passed that might be different than it was, say, 6 months ago, 1 year ago?
Some of the new things are having a second person, having the line of sight. It's mandatory that you have somebody with you to monitor where the drone's going and to make sure that you're flying safely. You have to have a line of sight on it as well as the person that's flying. You can't be flying over groups of people. That's a really big thing, because that's where you can get some serious liability issues. If, God forbid, something falls out of the sky, you want to make sure that there's somebody there to monitor the situation. I'm not clear on all of the rules because there was a 3-page document, but some of the things that I'm looking forward to are the commercial aspect, which gives me permission to go out. I just need to pass a written test and to get a certification, and I'm in the clear to fly commercially within the 400 feet of airspace.
Okay. Now, Dave, I know the ordinance, I took a look at it to see what the different aspects were, and one of them talks about getting permission from a homeowner if your drone is going to be shooting that particular property. So when we're talking about apartments or homes that maybe are sometimes close together where you're near other homes or other apartments, is that part of that ordinance, or how would that work?
It's absolutely part of the ordinance. So the way I would envision it would work is that if a individual or business is flying a drone over an apartment building, they would need the permission of the property owner. So we kept, and the same with the individual house. It's the property owner has to give written permission in advance, and if that's the case, and same with the municipality. So if the operator of a drone is flying over a public playground or some other municipal facility, then the Parks Department or whomever it is that has jurisdiction is the one responsible for giving that permission.
Okay. Now, I know recently I was actually driving in Chicopee, and someone was flying a drone, and it actually flew over a street. So as a driver, it's really easy to be distracted by that. Are there any rules federally, locally, that's being considered to make sure that people are flying in the right places?
In terms of where you can and cannot fly, it's basically you just can't be within certain distance of, airports and things like that, like federal facilities. You're not supposed to be flying too closely to airports. You have to be within 5-mile radius. And now part of the new rules and regulations, you're allowed to be within that radius, but you just have to make phone calls to the towers and the control people, and just get the right permission to be in the airspace, because low-flying aircraft is a big liability in terms of risk factor from flying over traffic and roads. Yeah, there's a distracting. It's very distracting, and I can see where that can become an issue. But as far as I know, there's no policy right now that says you can't be flying over roads. Maybe highways, but I haven't heard too clearly about that.
Do you think that's an issue?
It would be. So for sure. I mean, so the municipality would own the public ways, right? So If an operator wants to engage in that, he would need the permission of probably Department of Public Works or perhaps even Mayor's office.
Okay. Now, over the last year, one of the main reasons that drones have been in the spotlight is because people don't use them the right way. Take a look at this. A Connecticut teenager strapped a flamethrower onto a drone, caught it all on camera. Coming up, we'll hear what Jeff and David have to say about it. They're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about drones, how they work, and what the rules are. We have Jeff Burns, a local drone advocate and photographer who uses drones for his business, and David Bartley with the Holyoke City Council. So before our break, we saw this incredible video of a teenager from Connecticut who strapped a flamethrower onto his drone. You guys saw that. I mean, was that something, when you first saw it, was that shocking in any way?
Oh yeah, the first time I saw that was breaking news, and I thought that it was completely dangerous and completely reckless and irresponsible. And that's just a prime example of why we need regulations and strict rules on certain things that can be done with them.
And Dave, I see you shaking your head over here.
Yes, I mean, so Holyoke we have pretty clear ordinances that we don't even allow open burning in your backyard. Now, is that violated from time to time? I would suggest probably it is, but it's against city law to have any open flame in your backyard. Never mind a flamethrower.
And now this was about a year ago when this happened, but at the time the FAA looked into this and ruled technically no laws were broken. Do you agree with that ruling, or I'm just not sure?
I can understand because it's on his own property or his parents' property, because I remember he was under 18 years old. I think that I would have to agree with them because we're just seeing a video of him roasting a turkey around Thanksgiving, hanging from a tree in the backyard. It's not like he was out in public. I think if he was out in public, then we'd be looking at some serious charges being brought against him.
I mean, he's on private property, but again, it goes back to what I said earlier. You have, and not to disparage anyone, but you have the difference between somebody who's a non-professional like this young man and somebody like Jeff who's a professional who knows the rules. He can adapt to an ordinance. Now, he may not like it per se, but he'll adapt to it and he'll get the necessary permission if in fact we do pass it.
And we talk about rules, let's talk about enforcement. We might set things forth, but is there the resources to make sure that these rules and ordinances are properly enforced?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, there's never going to be resources for everything, so I'm not going to try to hide that. But in our draft ordinances, we say it'll be enforced by Holyoke Police Department. Right in the ordinance, it says the first time violator will be given a written warning, and from there, there's second, third, fourth offenses have escalating fines, $100 up to $300. So we tried to be reasonable about it and tried to be civil about this. But again, it's a draft, and we'll see what the powers that be have to say about it.
Is there any timeline on this draft? I know this was recently just taken up this week.
It was taken up at the 28th of June, and we decided as a committee to forward it to the Mass Aeronautical Commission upon the advice of our law department, and we'll see when they turn it around. So it's hard to say.
And now when we look at the FAA's guidelines that are set forth, are these guidelines or are there fines put in place by the FAA as well? I have
only heard of one instance of somebody being fined. As far as I know, I haven't seen anybody arrested or otherwise in trouble for not adhering to the rules and regulations. It's interesting how Councilor Bartley, is part of the committee that is imposing fines because the FAA doesn't even have that out there yet, unless there's something that we're not seeing. Like if you're caught breaking the rules, there might be some sort of backlash that you're given, but there's nothing out there in writing saying this is what happens if you don't adhere to our policies.
Well, do you think the fines are inappropriate then?
I feel it, based on what Councilor Bartley said, it's pretty steep. I can understand a written warning, but to impose, fines of that size just seems, pretty substantial.
Counselor?
That's his opinion. I don't blame him for shaking his head about that, but I mean, it's the same way with any fine. No one wants to be charged anything, but again, a written warning the first time, I think most individuals would get the hint. Second, third time, there have to be consequences.
And I know one of the other issues that the FAA has had is when there are instances involving drones, maybe a drone is flying near an airplane and violating restricted airspace, if the drone's not registered, it can be really hard to figure out who's operating it. Is that an issue that we need to address?
With the new rules and regulations that are coming out for commercial use, they want people to have a certificate, and once you have the certificate, you're in the clear to be flying. You have to adhere for aircraft and let them pass. If there was an incident to be found, it would be well documented who the operator is. In terms of the registration, I believe what I saw was that people no longer need to register them as long as they're going by the new guidelines and following through with the certification process.
Do you think that makes sense? Because it seems, I mean, it's kind of putting good faith in people to follow the guidelines.
I can't, you know, I can only argue for or against the policy. I have to side with what the FAA says because they're basically the ones that give me permission to do it. So I'm going to follow what they say no matter what and just go with it.
And now, Jeff, I know that you and I have actually been out at night, and you've shown me how these drones work. One of the ordinances from Holyoke restricts nighttime flying. Is that something? Where did that come from? Why nighttime?
Right. There's daylight hours into the twilight. So again, I believe that had to do with the purpose of the legislation, which is protecting privacy rights and protecting property owners from liability. And it says line of sight. So I mean, if there's a line of sight, it's a lot easier for I realize there's probably remote lights on the drone, unmanned flying aircraft, if you will, and but we felt that line of sight in the daytime is more efficient than at nighttime. Therefore, we put the restriction.
And Jeff, is that something that you think that is fair to have to abide by?
That's completely fair. I mean, the FAA themselves have said it's restricted to daylight hours only. So, you know, we don't need to be out there at night flying around. I mean, if you're filming for a production company and you're Hollywood and part of your job is to capture sun at night, that's a whole different set of rules. That's a whole different, you know, process that you're going through. But the average person shouldn't be out at night because, you know, a matter of seconds things can go wrong and then it's out of your line of sight and then you're dealing with any liability that comes your way.
And Jeff, I know one of the first times that we met is when you had used a drone to fly over the Essex House Hotel when that collapse happened in Holyoke. Now, at that time, I'm sure was it possible to even get written consent from someone to be able to fly over that property? In an emergency situation, is that consent still needed? There's
no doubt. There's somebody owns the property. In the case of the Essex House, it was I don't want to go into the merits of it because that'll get me aggravated, but the city took ownership of the property at a certain point in time, and so therefore you needed the permission of the city of Holyoke to fly over that property. If this regulation was in place at the time. It's not, the regulation is not even approved, it's just in draft, but if it were in place, then Jeff would need to have the city's permission to fly over it.
Any argument against that?
Given the situation, I was speaking with the fire chief. I was down there with, you know, the police chief, all of those officials, numerous city officials that were in awe of the ability to get up there to see it. The fire chief, as well as other people in the fire department, just they had an actual need. I don't think there was any question or any doubt that they needed to be able to see. It prevented the firefighters from getting the truck too close to the building as it was coming down. It, you know, it could potentially save lives and, you know, municipal equipment. So there was a need for it, and in terms of getting permission, there was no questions asked. Like, I showed up and they said, "Can we please see what you have?" And I said, "Absolutely." So it worked out for everybody. In certain instances, as you can see from the footage, I'm flying around the property. I don't think at any point in time I actually went over it. So if I'm on public property, who's to say that I would need permission if I'm just going around the outside of something, not actually technically flying over the property or getting too close where it would appear as if I'm on that property.
But he actually does raise a good point, because in case of an emergency situation like that, perhaps we could craft, you know, when we craft the ordinance, the final draft of it, we can talk about emergency situations where, I mean, if the fire chief says, you know, we need your help right now, Jeff's on site, you know, why not allow that to happen?
And Jeff, clearly you saw a benefit for you and for the city at that time.
I did. In conversation after the fact, the footage was given to the buildings engineers within the city, and numerous people were able to survey the footage and just say, yes, this is how it's going to come down. And it was a lot of benefit to the ability to put something where eyes couldn't really be seeing.
Well, Dave, I'd like to thank you for your time. And, as a viewer, you guys have heard a little bit about these drones. Now we want to show you exactly how they work. Jeff and I are going to head outside and put one to the test. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. So today we are talking about drones here on 22 News in Focus. We have Jeff Burns outside with us now to show us exactly how these things work. So why don't you walk me through? I know this is your setup. What do we have here?
Well, we have right here the controller with an LCD screen that's a receiver. And when I power everything up, it connects to the camera and I get a first-person point of view of what I'm seeing in the direction I'm heading in. The first step is to make sure that the battery's in the back, which I've already done. And you want to just power it up.
That's a fun noise.
Yeah, it goes through a process of trying to calibrate itself.
Now, this LCD screen that you had, does this come with the drone, or was this a separate thing?
No, this is something that I've modified to work with the camera and work with this specific drone. This particular model didn't have a first-person point of view. The technology that has replaced this one does have an all-inclusive, and all you need to do is connect an iPhone or an iPad to view what you want to shoot and see.
I know one of the regulations that we've been talking about is always having a line of sight. So is this something that really helps you stay in tune with those regulations?
Actually, no, it doesn't. This just gives me a view of what I'm looking at and where I'm heading. So if there's something in front of me, then I can see what's in front of me or what's below me.
So this is the drone's point of view.
The drone's point of view,
as
yes.
if you're the drone.
The line of sight would be a secondary person that could either help control the drone or help control the camera's pitch and tilt when you're filming certain things, and they act as the second person that can view while one person's flying. So
I guess that's me today, right?
Yeah, that's you today. So the system's ready. We've got green lights. That's really important because if there's any kind of yellow or if there's any kind of red, I don't want to chance it. I would power down and try powering up again. The technology is great, but there's still some little bugs here and there that make things a little tricky. There's a lot of environmental factors that can go into it as well, like electromagnetic fields. I have flown off of the hood of a vehicle before, which messed with the frequencies and the magnets, and it took its own crash course.
Is that what the red means, a difference in frequency?
Red, not necessarily that, but it just means there's an error. It's throwing an error. So we're good to go. I'm just going to set the GPS, and as you can see, the lights switched again, which means now I'm going to set the GPS, and it's basically going to know that this is where it came from, and in theory it will come back to the spot if there's any sort of issues.
So that's really cool. It can really bring itself right back to where it started.
Yeah, because now the controller and the drone are speaking together.
Is this something every drone has, though?
No, like this is connected to at minimum 6 satellites right now, so it will be able to know its coordinates. But I mean, everything's connected right now, so right now we are ready to fly.
Okay, cool. Let's see if we can lift it off.
All right. Take a step back because there's moving parts. His cable, if you want to step back just a little bit more. Yep. So we are good.
There it goes. So how are you controlling this right now? I know we've got a couple different joysticks, it looks like. Is one for height, one for
is for
direction?
altitude. It can go up and down. That's on the left side. The right side goes left, right, and forward. The other feature about this too is that I can rotate, so I can go forwards, I can go up, I can go down, or I can turn.
This is pretty cool, and it's this wind. It's creating some serious wind here too.
Well, I mean, there's 4 moving parts. They spin pretty quickly, so you know it's almost like a helicopter, but obviously much smaller.
And now, when we talk about quality, this is a pretty decent sized drone. How much does this thing weigh?
I'm not completely sure the weight. I've never weighed it. Once I put the additional parts on there plus the GoPro, the gimbal itself adds a little bit more weight to it. I know it can hold much more than what I have on there, but part of the rules and regulations is that your drone has to weigh with under a certain amount, because once you get over that, then it's treated as if it's a commercial aircraft.
Okay, so you're making sure you stay within those limits.
Yeah, and most drone manufacturers, I'm sure, operate within that too, because the larger they get, the more camera equipment and the more technology that you can put onto it.
So does that mean if it's bigger, the quality that you're going to be getting is better?
Far superior. You can put cinema quality cameras on drones very easily, and you can create all kinds of, you know, dynamic work.
Pretty cool. So now, if we want this thing to go back to where it started, we were just talking about that.
Yes.
How does that happen?
That would just, I mean, it takes a little bit of practice. It's not something that's, you know, comes second nature. It all depends on if you're flying forwards or backwards. Once you go, you know, facing forward, left is left, right is right. But the moment you turn around, left now becomes right and right becomes left. So it gets confusing if you're not used to, you know, thinking outside the box like that. And it's just a matter of, you know, working the controls and going back to where you started from.
Right where it started. So how long did it take you to be able to be skilled enough to switch around like that and get it back to where you started?
It's taken a lot of practice. It's taken quite a few crashes. There will be crashes. If you've never used something like this before, expect that you will crash.
So
And there is a serious learning curve with the technology as well as controlling the device.
what do you recommend for people if you're expecting crashes? What kind of environment should you be in then for something
You
like
need to
this?
be in a very large open space, away from objects, away from buildings, people, homes, vehicles. You have any sort of crash, you're at risk in yourself as well as other people, and serious liability.
Yeah, let's talk about liability. Are there any rules set forth? Like, let's say we're flying this drone and we hit someone or we hit something. How does that work? Is that even hammered out yet?
As the FAA has tried to figure themselves out, so too have insurance companies. Last I heard, when I signed up with a professional photographer's insurance company, they did not have any liability coverage for drones. The drone itself is covered as part of my equipment, but I am not covered in terms of liability. So if I was to crash, cause any sort of damage, I am at fault, and it's automatically my responsibility to cover that.
So that could be something potentially that could cost someone big bucks depending on what happens.
Yes, and yes. Yes.
And now we have this thing that's grounded right now, and I know this is just one of several different models that are out there. This is not something that you can just go and pick up at your local toy store, because if you walk through the toy store, they've got several different options
Correct.
for kids.
When you're in a toy store, you're buying a toy. It's not the same technology. It's not a device similar to this by any means. The closest store around here that sells this requires you to sign a waiver saying that you will not hold them responsible because of liability purposes. So it's not something you can buy in a toy store, and it's something that you really want to strongly consider the type before you purchase.
And when we talk about cost, just the base model, I know you've added a bunch of stuff onto this, but is this expensive?
It can be very expensive very quickly. Base models now are around 1,000, and they start from, models like this start at about 1,000, and they work themselves up to about 2,000, and then even higher. There's certain models that they start around 2,500, put a new camera onto it, and you're looking at a couple $1,000s more. And then when you start to build them out, then they get even more expensive, tens of thousands of dollars.
Okay, but obviously you pay for the difference and you pay for the quality.
Yes, yes,
Big difference.
yes.
Do you have any other smaller ones that maybe don't shoot as well as this one does?
I do not. The system I have is pretty good. It's using the latest GoPro technology. That's sufficed pretty well. You know, GoPros are used in a lot of documentaries, movies, and films, so the quality's there. It's just not, you know, the most current.
Okay, well, thank you, Jeff, so much for joining us. Now, coming up on 22 News in Focus, we're going to hear from a C5 pilot from Westover Air Reserve Base about how drones like this are impacting her in her business and her line of work. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we are talking about drones. We showed you how they work and talked about some of the heated issues like privacy and regulations. Well, one issue you might not think about is how drones are affecting airports and air bases across the country and right here in Western Massachusetts. Joining me now is Major Emily Kojal. She's an experienced C5 pilot at Westover Air Reserve Base. So, Major, my first question, can drones pose a serious danger to pilots?
They absolutely can. You know, we have we worry a lot in aviation about bird strikes specifically, how a little bird can damage an airplane, especially being ingested into an engine. We've got a lot of people that don't know the rules and really don't understand the risks of what a hard piece of plastic going into an engine could do, or even just hitting any part of the airframe could do. So it's becoming more and more of a topic, and it could definitely be dangerous for any aviator, let alone C5s.
And I know you have some examples here
Right.
of some drones. Some of them are big, some of them are really small.
Right.
Want to grab that little small one for me? Let's take a look at that. I thought this was actually a toy model, but this is a real drone.
Correct.
Could something like that really pose a risk?
This probably wouldn't, and again, like, it goes back into the FAA regulations of 0.55 pounds to 55 pounds. This is less than a half a pound. So this isn't something that even has to be registered. You're probably not really going to go, you know, it could not get that high anyway, so it's probably not going to cause a serious issue. But something like your professional photographer's drone that can get significantly higher in altitude, that could be a way bigger problem for an aircraft.
And that's these two.
Right, and these are also fairly lightweight, still required to be registered over a half a pound. But God forbid something like this ended up in an engine. It's a lot of plastic, you know, a battery on the back of it, you know, that being ingested into an engine could cause a serious problem.
When you're a pilot and you're up there, what are you guys seeing?
A lot of times it would be very hard to see something little like this. However, we do see birds, you know, fly under us, fly over us. That's something that we're always looking out for. But sometimes it's hard to see. So something that's, you know, maybe brightly colored would be easier to see, but, you know, against a hazy background with a white drone, you're probably not going to see it. And that kind of poses an even bigger risk of how can we avoid it if we can't see it. So that's something that we definitely should consider in that, and basically trying to stay away from aircraft when you're flying a drone, because the chances of us being able to see it, and more importantly being able to react to it, are not very good.
And when you talk about the risks, what exactly are they?
So a bird that's about 2.5 pounds, say like a red-tailed hawk, for example, recently did an investigation on a hawk that hit a C-17 engine, caused over $4.6 million of damage. If you think about a bird versus a drone, the components of such are completely different. You've got flesh and feathers and hollow bones versus hard plastic. So hitting an engine, even if it just hits a little part of the engine, sends it off balance, breaks off a fan blade inside the engine, could send the whole thing off and literally disintegrate the engine on the inside. If you're in heavy aircraft like the C-5 and had a lot of cargo or something like that and it took out an engine, it could seriously be a potentially a really bad thing for the aircraft to stay in flight. Could bring it down for sure.
And this isn't just dangerous, this can be really costly as well.
Definitely costly, and millions of dollars are I guess spent in fixing aircraft every year, billions of dollars probably, from bird strikes. So as the sales of drones have gone up, people are using them more and more. I think they estimated more than 600,000 drone sales over Christmas last year. So they're expecting it to become more and more of an issue, with more people flying it and not knowing the rules and flying them closer and closer to airports. The cost of damage or loss of life could be very costly.
And you mentioned the rules. So for Westover, is it the same rules across the country, and what exactly are they?
Yeah, same rules that the FAA came down with in December, that within 5 miles of an airport, you're not allowed to fly a UAV or drone unless you've contacted the control facility ahead of time. So at Westover, it's the base operations, and they're at 557-2951. you can give them a call ahead of time and say, hey, I'm in a 5-mile ring, I'd like to fly my drone, is it an issue? And they can let you know if it's a problem that day or not. Sometimes there's not a lot going on at Westover and it wouldn't be an issue, but on days where we have a lot of things going on, then maybe they'll say no. So it gives everybody a heads up of what's going on. So 5 miles within an airport, got to think about how big a 5-mile ring is actually around Westover Air Reserve Base. It's a pretty big ring. And then you start adding a 5-mile ring that would encompass Bradley and Westfield and Barnes. You're getting overlapping rings. So there's going to be some areas where it's not going to be safe to fly at all.
So when we talk about being safe to fly, what if I live within that 5-mile radius? I have a drone like this, and I'm just flying it in my front yard. Does the height that you're flying impact what you're able to do?
It does. And realistically for us, we haven't had any issues at Westover so far. We have had people call in and ask already if it's safe to fly. The FAA mandates that you fly below 400 feet. Unless we were on our final approach path into Westover, that would be well below our area that we would be flying in. But if you had a drone like say Jeff's drone that can get a lot higher, and you were happening to fly it on the final approach course for a runway, you could fly it right into an airplane.
And now at Westover, is this anything that you guys have seen that's caused an issue, or have people been really good so far?
People have been really good, and then we have a really good relationship with our local community. We have found a drone inside the fence line that was probably someone's personal drone that dropped down in there and they didn't get it back. And maybe they didn't call or didn't know where it went. That could be a possibility. The line of sight thing was mentioned before. You have to be able to keep it in your line of sight under 400 feet, and if you're in that 5-mile ring, you need to call the airport. But it's not really been a problem for us. It could always become a problem. The aviation community in general, military and commercial aviation, are really considering it a high threat.
And Major, I have some numbers that I want to read off to you that I just found to be pretty shocking. So in less than 2 years, more than 900 reported incidents of drones near a manned aircraft. Now, out of that 900, 327 of them were considered close encounters. So they were within 500 feet of a plane.
Right.
When you hear something like that, what comes to mind?
It's a scary number. And again, that's in the last 2 years where they're becoming more and more popular. So what scares me about that is the likelihood as these get cheaper and cheaper and are more accessible to everyone else, that those numbers are going to go up. And we're very lucky to this point that there hasn't been an accident, but I would say with the rapid increase in those numbers, as well as the ability to get a drone, I think it's going to be a real problem in the future.
Now, I know one of the issues too, not that long ago, there was an incident where a drone flew near a commercial plane near JFK, and the drone wasn't registered, and it's hard to figure out who's doing this.
Right.
Is that an issue that you could foresee?
Definitely, and as mentioned before about there's rule-abiding citizens and people that don't really follow the rules. It's really easy to register. There's a website, Know Before You Fly. You can get on there and register your drone. It's really, really simple. It costs $5, and it gives you a flight ID card and then a sticker to put on your drone that registers it. It definitely helps have a little bit more accountability for everybody that's operating and try to keep everybody a little safer.
And do you think there is anything we can do to try and curb these numbers, make sure this doesn't happen?
I think the only thing that we can do is continue to do things like this where we're highlighting that. I think a lot of people just don't know. It's a fun toy. If you've flown one, they're fun to fly. It does get really, really dangerous though, and I don't think people really understand that you flying a little drone in your backyard, if you happen to live by an airport and you take it up and it happens to get ingested into an aircraft, could destroy an aircraft, or it could really hurt somebody and or kill someone. So I think just bringing awareness to it and highlighting the fact that this is a really dangerous thing to fly near an airport, I think that's probably one of the best things that we can do to curb it.
Okay. Well, Major, thank you so much for your
welcome.
time. And now, clearly, if drone owners don't follow the rules, there can be serious risks, but when used the right way, there can be a lot of benefits. We'll show you what those are coming up on 22 News in Focus. You are watching 22 News in Focus. Today we've been talking about drones, and in our last segment we talked about some of the risks, but now we want to focus on the benefits. Joining me now is John Karras, a Special Analysis Lab Director at Smith College. Thanks for joining us, John.
Sure, good to be here.
So John, my first question, can you explain what exactly a Special Analysis Lab Director does?
Sure, I'm glad you asked that because it's actually a Spatial Analysis Lab Director. Spatial meaning we study space. Simply, we make maps, we analyze maps And that's been my intersection into drones, because with drones we can take our own aerial photography and imagery and make Google Earth, Google Maps-like images.
Okay, so now you brought something with you. So let's
did.
take a look at this. This is a drone that you said you kind of modified.
Yes, so one of the things we're doing in the spatial analysis lab, as well as we have another lab that's specifically designed to build drones, design drones, think about drone technology. And so some of my students modified this particular drone body. They made it waterproof for some of our work down in Belize, because if we're flying out over the ocean and this takes a dip in the water, we want to be able to recover it. So this is a fully waterproof drone. We can get into the cavity, we can get to the motors, the speed controllers, and fully understand the anatomy of a drone and how this technology works.
Okay, so you mentioned Belize. So this drone obviously and other drones can help you with research. Why don't you tell me what you guys were doing down in Belize?
Sure. So our work in Belize grew out of early on kite photography to try and get images of the coral reef as well as the mangrove forests. And so we're looking to get an environmental baseline of this fairly fragile ecosystem that interplays together. So mangrove forest destruction affects the coral reefs, silt and sedimentation gets into the waterways. So we want to study that whole ecosystem. The kite photography, while it was great and fun, didn't allow us a platform stable enough to make maps from the imagery. So we've moved to drone technology. To go down there, we can program a flight path, an autonomous flight path for the drone to follow, and it overlaps the imagery that it's taking, and that allows us to take that overlapping imagery and put it together so you can read it like a map.
So this is pretty cool, and there's obviously some clear benefits to having that technology.
Absolutely. Some of the benefits, I mean, they're almost too numerous to list, but we can go down when and where we want. So we have both frequency and location agility to get our imagery. And that's very important, particularly places in Belize where it might be a very cloudy, overcast day. Satellite imagery that's commercially available isn't going to be good enough for our researchers. It's also not high enough resolution, so the pixels on the ground are much larger or coarse, and we can't delineate or detect the features that we're interested in studying.
I know this is some video we have on our screen right now from Belize. So what are we looking at right here?
So what we're looking at here is really not our bread and butter. This is just video more for fun, but we're also kind of chronicling and documenting the work that we're doing on the ground. In this case, it's students in kayaks that are laying down transects and looking at the propagation of mangrove roots in the waterway. And then we'll determine from our photography if we can image that from the air to correlate that with our on-ground surveys.
Now, something I want to talk about too is quality. I know prior to drones, satellite technology was really heavily used. Is this drone technology a lot better than that?
It is. It's on par with manned aircraft flying and maybe at 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet, typical aerial photography, which is better than satellite imagery. All these technologies are getting better all the time, but again, with the frequency and the agility that we can go out and image where and when we want is vastly improved, and we're getting better resolution in many cases for parts of the world that we're working in.
So here, what we just saw, the top seemed to be the drone image that was way clearer than the satellite image. So when you have that clear picture, does that just give you an overall better understanding, obviously, of what you're looking at?
Right. It's both a better understanding and the ability to map that. So we can delineate these features, whereas the image below that's from the satellite image is a little more blurry, and we don't get that fidelity in the image. So we can't fully understand or measure that particular feature on the ground, whereas the drone imagery, we can do that. Another benefit of this imagery is to produce the images, it creates what's called a point cloud. And so this is a three-dimensional environment that's constructed from all those overlapping images. And from that point cloud, we can do measurements in three-dimensional space.
Was this even possible a few years ago?
No, so it wasn't possible and an affordable technology for us to enter into this type of environment.
And I know the students, you guys have been traveling together with the students, seeing this kind of technology as it's developing at such a young age. Have they really taken on to this?
The student, I mean, that's why we exist, and that's why we're doing this, is because the students will be the ones that need to understand this technology and use it appropriately, which I know this show is talking about. They need to understand the systems, its limitations, and its affordances. And they are good flyers. They understand the system probably better than I do, some of our engineering students. And they're very excited about the technology. So that's why we're trying to make it possible and accessible for them to think deeply about this technology, not only how to use it for research and science, but what it means to society and our culture more broadly.
And now you guys obviously, you travel and you leave the country. So obviously, you know, you have the FAA's rules here, but when you leave, does that change at all?
It does change depending on where we go. There's certain rules and regulations we have to follow, even taking a drone on a commercial air flight. We have to bring it with us on board. We can't check this equipment because the batteries are an explosive device, and we don't want to let the drone get lost in check-in. So there's some concerns and regulations that we have to follow just to get into the country, and then there might be specific country rules that we have to abide by. Right now, so far, we've gone down to Belize and the Bahamas, and those rules have not been well articulated, or they're not really strict regulations, although there is now a new permitting fee or permitting structure to bring a drone into Belize. So they want to know that you're in the country with the drone and that that drone will leave the country when you depart.
And I know we saw some video from Belize and the drones were flying over roads and things like that. Is that different than it is here in the U.S.?
It is. Those roads that we were looking at there are unpaved roads and there was nobody on them. If you were to fly over a road in the U.S. with traffic, that would be considered a reckless maneuver, and that is prohibited in the current regulations and the current rules.
Okay. And now, what you mentioned the Bahamas. What were you guys doing down there? Similar work?
Similar work. That was an interesting opportunity. We were at San Salvador, a small island in the Bahamas chain, and it got hit by Hurricane Joaquin last October. And the hurricane essentially stalled over that island for a couple of days. And as you can imagine, with a hurricane, it caused a lot of damage. So we were down in San Salvador assessing the extent of that damage, the erosion of the coastal areas and the beach. And again, we were able to deploy the drone to certain parts of the island that our other researchers were working on at the same time. So we had a very rapid response and a turnaround of our data and measurements to get that to the Bahamian government.
So once you do the research and you pass it along, what impact does it have?
Right now, I think the impact will be that they can incorporate this technology and use our studies to understand the effects of the hurricane, and then they can use that to plan for their future events of that category. And adding to that sea level rise and climate change, it just gives us a better tool to measure these ecosystems and give governments and agencies the ability to plan better for the future.
And John, my last question for you. As we look to the future, maybe 10 years from now, do you think this technology is really going to grow and the impacts will be even greater?
The impacts, I do. I mean, this is a technology that I don't see stopping. We are at its infancy, just like aviation about 100 years ago. Some people call this, you know, the dawn of the internet with this technology, because it's a convergence of many small technologies. And it's very affordable and accessible. So the growth is there. There's a lot of money behind it and a lot of interest. And I think the FAA has taken the right approach. They're being cautious, and they're opening up the airspace for researchers to use, as well as commercial operations. There's a little concern still there of how they're doing that. We argue that this is our airspace and not necessarily the FAA's to regulate down to the ground.
Bit of a gray area that we continue to work on.
It will be sorted out as we move forward in the future.
All right, well, thank you, John, so much for joining us. And now coming up after the break, we'll have the last word. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. The goal of today's program, to make sure you know how drones work, what the current laws are, and what regulations your local cities are trying to pass. Thanks for joining us, and remember, if you missed any of today's program, you can find it on our website, wwlp.com. From all of us here at 22 News, have a wonderful Sunday.